Morning, everyone. Thanks for being at SMC today. My name is Bob. I'm one of the pastors here, and what a privilege to be one of the staff members, one of the leaders here of a church that, with some regularity and humility, we get to hear stories like Anna Ricky's. Only, how many times have you heard me say it? Only God. Only God does that kind of miraculous transformation. So we're awfully glad for that. Sean, if I'm not mistaken, you're 25 years old. When you were standing up here on the stage with Nick, you look much younger than that. But when I watched you standing on the stage, I thought, I realized that you and I have two things in common. I was 25 years old when I first came to work here, and I shave twice a week, just like it seems you do. So you'll be right at home. The bad news is in 15 years, you'll look sort of like Nick, and then God help you, brother. Okay? So does the date, May 6th, 1954, mean anything to any of you? Probably not, unless it happens to be your birthday. Before that day, the conclusion was that it was humanly impossible to run a mile in under 4 minutes. But then on May the 6th of 54, Roger Bannister completed the mile run, 3 minutes, 59 seconds. And once that 4-minute barrier was broken, maybe you know this, but the next several years, dozens of runners were able to do it. It's incredible, isn't it, that when a new benchmark is established, the human spirit somehow just rises up inside of us. And today, a 4-minute mile is hardly considered to be a challenge any longer for world-class runners. The world record today, just for your information, is at 3:43 and a little bit of change. Now think about that. That's 17 seconds, faster than what was at one point thought to be impossible. When I was growing up as a kid in the 50s and 60s, it was believed that Lou Gehrig's amazing record of consecutive games would never be matched or broken. 2,130 major league games in a row that the great Gehrig started. But then Cal Ripken, he came along and passed Gehrig's unbreakable barrier by more than 500 consecutive games. He ended his career with 2,632 games started without any interruption. That's more than 6 whole baseball seasons more than Lou Gehrig. Benchmarks, once they're there, they just have a way of raising up our human spirit and the competitive resolve that's somewhere down inside of us. Richard Petty won an incredible 200 NASCAR events over his illustrative career. David Pearson is in second place with 105 wins. There's a reason why we call this man the king. Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls as a starting NFL quarterback. That's an amazing accomplishment. Bill Russell won 11 NBA championships. Some of you are aware Jack Nicklaus won 18 major tournaments over his career. None of those have been matched so far. And the great Triple Crown winner, Secretariat, so far has been the only racehorse to run the Kentucky Derby in under 2 minutes. Actually, 1 minute and 59 seconds. You get bonus if you know what year. 73. That's good. Susan was sitting on the front row at the early service, and she popped out on that one because that was the same year we were married. In fact, we were married about 6 weeks after Secretariat won the Kentucky Derby. And no kidding, I had to be at some meetings, and so not long after we were married, we were in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, and we got a chance to tour Churchill Downs, and Secretariat's name tag was still on the stall that they kept him in, so that's absolutely meaningless, but a little piece of trivia there for you. I think it was this week or week before last. Did you see where Amy Winters set a new record? She ran 100 miles on a treadmill. Now you think about that. You run 100 miles and you're still at the same place where you started. That's incredible. But now watch, notice this. She also lost a leg. 100 miles on a treadmill with a prosthetic leg. We didn't have a picture of Susan Williams, but by the way, Susan is a world record holder too. She blew the largest bubblegum bubble ever, 23 inches across. College football teams are gearing up for the 2021 season. It'll start in a couple of weeks. And every one of those teams, they have goals that have been established for this year. At my alma mater, Duke University, if they win half the games, that's considered to be a big deal. If you're a Clemson fan, If it's not a national championship, then you think it's a busted season. Almost every successful company that you'll ever know about, they have sales goals and quotas, and churches have certain benchmarks that they want to achieve every year. Students have just returned to Elon, and most of those students, they watch that GPA carefully, or at least their parents do, and they're looking for some measurement of academic success and potential. Well, guess what? There are tens of thousands of people across this town, and certainly they want their Christianity to work the same way. They want to believe that if they just try harder, that they can raise the bar, the standard. I've met so many believers over the years who have determined that if they can just achieve success as a follower of Jesus, and the way you do that is you just work tirelessly and you start accumulating this first string, world record style, impressive religious resume. My guess is that if we took an informal survey across our town or up and down the street where you live, we'd find people saying, hey, look, come on, I live a decent life. What do you expect? I try to basically be a nice person. I vote, pay taxes. I give to United Way, attend church every now and then. I tip generously in the restaurants. Even sometimes I pay for the person's coffee behind me in the line at Starbucks. Come on, Bob, relax. I'm a good person. I have a decent moral resume. Years ago, a man walked up to me. We were still in the building over here, introduced himself. It was right after our Easter service. It was on April the 11th, 1993. He had an interesting request. Grabbed me by both shoulders as he was about ready to level the playing field. Had a demand for me. About 6 months before that day, in October of 1992, his new wife literally bribed him into attending church. She made him promise before they went to the altar of a church to be married that if she married him, that he would attend church. And he told me years later, yada, yada, you'll say anything if you're a guy who wants to get married. So I said, sure, I'll do that. This man had literally not darkened the doors of a church since he was 17 years old. In 92, he was 42 years old. You can add the numbers and do the math. His new wife had heard about SMC. She had a list of about 4 or 5 churches that they wanted to visit and try out. So this then became one of the churches that he was going to visit once. That's what he said, one time. He was completely determined that whatever church he attended, it would not be good. He would not like it, but at least he would be able to prove to his new bride that when he stopped attending church many years before this, when he was a teenager, nothing much had changed. The church is still boring and it's still irrelevant. But God. How many times do we say that around here? But God started stirring something up deep inside of this man. And it began literally the very first service that he attended over in the original sanctuary. He came into this church with a hard level of crust surrounding his heart. But his heart was about to be tenderized by the God of the universe. So now he's standing 3 feet away from me. It's Easter Sunday. He's got his hands like this around my shoulders. He had been attending this church for about 6 months. I never met him. He introduced himself to me and he said, I'm telling you something. I am not leaving this church today until you tell me how to become a Christian. Well, I was exhausted. We'd just had 4 Easter services. But he was serious. I'm not leaving until you tell me how to become a Christian. And I said, could we talk about it tomorrow? And he said, sure. So we scheduled some time that week and we started talking about it. Let me tell you about him. This man was well-educated, master's degree. He was at the very top of his profession. It's a very high-pressure, competitive type of job. There were tremendous demands on him every single day. He had to make decisions, and he needed to make good ones, and he wanted to keep the company moving in a positive direction. He was making a lot of money. Certainly his position in the marketplace and the standards that had been established in that particular career path, let me tell you, this man was killing it. He had 2 kids, 2 teenage boys. He had accumulated around himself some noticeable symbols of success. And if you knew him in those days, you would have said, this man's got it. He's got what you want if you're an American. He had whatever you might consider to be important. He admitted to me when we started meeting that he had given up on church a long time ago, back in those teenage years. But then he said, I found the services here to be compelling, not like what I remembered when I was a kid. He said, you people are serious. You're serious about this Jesus stuff. You're serious about Jesus being a high priority, but he said, I don't know how it works. You're gonna have to explain it to me. So after listening to his story, I thought, let me see, I'm gonna throw a little gas on this conversation. I'm gonna spice it up a bit. So I said to him, I simply asked him, so can you tell me a little bit about how you believe you stack up with God? So when you think about your relationship with God. He said, I think I'm doing all right. I'm an honest guy at work. I lead a company with integrity. I keep my word. I respect the staff. I have an appreciation for the people that work around me. I'm committed to my marriage. I coach one of my son's baseball teams in the summer. I help out when the company has their annual barbecue. I think I live a decent life. And I said, I can't argue with that, but what if I told you that when you think about God's standard, that God's standard might be just a little bit north of decent, might be a little higher than that. And I did not wait for a response. I reached across the conference table that we were sitting at. I grabbed a pad of paper and I sketched out a simple diagram of a ladder. Not as neat as this one is, but it served the purpose. I showed him this image of a ladder, and at the top I wrote God's standards, God's standard, his goodness. You know what? Did y'all hear about the early service? The early service, the fire alarm went off. I'm not making this up. Sean, notice this now. Notice how. So I'm just going to tell you. So Joanne, one of our elders was sitting back there, and I told the church at 9 o'clock because the fire alarm just kept going on and on and on for like 15 minutes. I mean, all the fire trucks came over. And I said, I know what it is. It's the elders. They are sabotaging this thing to see if I can hold up under the pressure. And then I said, I promise y'all, nobody got up and ran out, because I'm thinking it could be a fire, it could be smoke, it could be a terrorist or something like that. It could be a guy with a gun. You never know in this day and time, but nobody ran out. And I said, I promise you it was a 3-year-old who pulled the alarm. You know what it was? A 3-year-old. An absolute 3-year-old who pulled the alarm. Now, Nick, I was intending to write on this. So now what? Can I do it now? Because I didn't touch it before and it fell. So, all right, I tell you what I'm going to do. Seriously, I'm going to pray right now because I don't want the fire alarm to go off, and I cannot get through. I got a long day ahead of me. I don't want to get distracted here again. Okay, so God, God, sometimes these distractions, they just happen, and once in a while I feel like I'm boxing against the adversary or something like that. But we know at least that he's real, and he would like to mess us up and get us all out of whack and stuff. But I pray that that would not happen, and that whatever occurs that might be loud or cumbersome or stuff falling off the stage, that you would honor what we do here today for Jesus' sake. Amen. Now, you might be surprised to learn how many Christians have placed their hopes for God's favor and blessing based on a ladder like this. How much good stuff that they've accumulated hoping to keep God happy. Sometimes I think of it it's like the Christian version of karma. It's like every now and then, God just maybe sends a windfall in our direction, and maybe maybe it'll cancel out all the careless, stupid, reckless, irresponsible decisions that we've made over the years. I remember the guy who told me decades ago, instead of using a ladder as an image, he said, I got stacks of stuff, Bob. He said, I keep 2 stacks. I've got this one stack, and every time I do something good, I just add something in this stack, and over here are the blunders and bloopers and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I'm telling you the way this works. He's telling me, now, I'm telling you the way this works. When you get to the end of your life and close your eyes the last time, you better hope you got something a little bit more in the good stack than you do the bad stack. Because if you don't, you're in a heap of trouble. And I thought, I believe this guy really believes that. And he said, got to pay attention to your two stacks, Bob, I'm telling you. That's like, when I thought about that the other day, I thought that's the same guy who goes and orders a Big Mac and a Diet Coke. Hoping that maybe it'll just cancel out the calories or something. But that guy told me, he said, I'm telling you, you get to the end of your life, you better pay attention to your stacks. And I said, yeah, but you don't know when your life's going to end. And he said, oh, come on, Bob, don't make the story. I got my story down pat about it. Let's talk about the ladder. So I gave my friend a little introduction to God's goodness standard. And I said, here's the goal. Here's where we got to be. And so I handed him a marker. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about it for a moment, but then I want you to put an X mark on this ladder where you think you would be right now, because you got a lot of good things going for you. So he took the marker and he was thinking about it. And I said, oh, by the way, maybe it would be helpful if I establish a couple of benchmarks for you, and then maybe that'll help you to leverage where you're going to place your mark. So I said, this bottom rung down here is, that's where the bad dudes are. And I said, can you name some? And, it was like, everybody thinks of Hitler and maybe there's Bin Laden. And let's see, name some other really, Jeffrey Dahmer, Mussolini. Those are bad. Those are bad people. And so, he said, sure, yeah, that makes sense. They're about as far away as you can get. And then I said, how about some notable Christian leaders that you can think of? Well, he didn't know any in particular. And I said, Mother Teresa. Back in those days, Mother Teresa was always the go-to. And I said, I read about Mother Teresa one time, and I read where she said that, in terms of reaching close to God, she said, I'm a pretty good distance from that. So I said, let's just imagine that maybe Mother Teresa is right here. And then Billy Graham. Everybody likes to mention Billy Graham, and I did hear, no kidding, I heard Billy Graham say one time that, boy, I love Mother Teresa, but I'm nowhere close to her. So I said, we'll give Billy the benefit of the doubt, and we'll put him right here. And then maybe, I don't know who you think of, James Dobson and, some other great Christian leaders maybe here. And then I paused for a second, and I said, well, Maybe would it help you if I put my X on there? And so he said, well, yeah, if you want to. So, and I said, well, the bad guys and stuff. And so I said, maybe right here. Now watch now. Now, we did not set this up. But now watch this. At the early service this morning, when I put my X right there, the fire alarm went off. And 99% of the people here thought it was all a setup. In fact, there was a dude sitting right there on the front row, and I had just made my X right there, and he said, too high, Bob, too high. No kidding. Hey, Phil Anderson, you like working here? I used to. Daggone. And now the thing. Hey, Sean, the good news is, I'm just going to tell you, the good news is that the youth department of this church gets most of the money. And y'all fully deserve it. We get, this was the thing that y'all threw away a couple years ago, Nick, wasn't it, Nick? It was. Nick said, man, this is a piece of junk. Let's give it to the big church people, and Sean, can you believe, this is 2 services in a row. Can you believe this? Good night. All right, look at what Paul said. Golly, let's read the Bible. You want to? Let's read the Bible. Paul said, now watch this ladder. He said, everyone has sinned. Everybody. And they all fall short of the standard, of the minimum standard. I put my X there. I don't consider myself in the same in the same ballpark with these spiritual giants. And I remember looking at my friend and said, now I want you to see. Notice how I'm pretty close to the bad guys. I got a long way to go. And then I explained to him, I said, look, I'm gonna let you off the hook and tell you that this is not the way Christianity works. It's what he thought, but it's not the way it works because we can't make up the gap. We don't have enough time left to make up the gap. So whatever yours looks like honesty in the marketplace, check. Coached Little League soccer team, check. Cut my neighbor's grass when he was on vacation, check. Made dinner for a friend. Shared my umbrella, sent a handwritten letter, sat down over coffee and really listened to a friend, gave some kids, you know how the kids have the lemonade stand, stopped and gave the kids a $20 bonus, attend church, gave in the offering, check. But based on this, the question then becomes, have you ever fudged on your tax returns? Have you ever stretched the truth, passed along some salacious information about another person, compromised your expense account, lost your temper, used profanity with the name of God attached to it, coveted a friend's brand new car, looked at a neighbor down the street and wish you were them, flipped off somebody in traffic? And what if all of those things cancel out here? This ladder climbing hope. What if they cancel out all your check marks? You're thinking, come on, Bob, everybody does some things every now and then that get them messed up. I'm not going to argue with that, but we accumulate a pretty large moral debt over the years. How did Paul describe it? Everyone has sinned. Everybody on this ladder, everybody's sinned. They all fall short of the standard. That's what he said in Romans 3:23. But in Romans 6, look at what he says. The payment for this is death. Now, if you look up that word in the original language, it doesn't mean like physical death when you fall over and you breathe your last breath. The word actually means in eternity we would be separated from God. So that's a high price to pay. And if you believe in life after death, you can imagine that what this means is that without somebody intervening, there's going to be this gap that's going to cause you to miss out on eternity. What a nightmare, except Paul says the payment for sin is death, but God, there it is again, but God, I mean, I've said it 1,000 times on this platform, but God gives us the free gift of life forever in Christ Jesus our Lord. And we just spent a lot of time during our worship segment to talk about God's grace. Here's how Jesus illustrated it in the greatest sermon of all times. I've read this every week in this series. He said, go in through the narrow gate. The gate to destruction is wide. And the road that leads there is easy to follow. A lot of people, and we refer to that as casual Christians, go through that gate, but the gate to life is very narrow. The road that leads there is so hard to follow that only a few, that would be the fully devoted followers of Jesus, find it. On the day of judgment, so when it's all said and done for us, many will call me their Lord. They will say, we preached in your name, and in your name we forced out demons, and we worked many miracles. And that's where we start stacking up our religious resume. But Jesus says, I will tell them, nope, I never knew you. It's not what it's about, Jesus said. So let's be clear that when Jesus was preaching this sermon, he was not addressing a group of pagans or agnostics or atheists or anything of the kind. These were not people that were worshiping Romans and Greek gods. His audience that day was probably a large crowd of faithful, devoted Jewish people in the group. He's saying that if you want a right relationship with God, it is never going to be determined by some ladder standard of the things that you do. So it must be something else if this doesn't work. Maybe even a different plan. Some people say, well, I'm going with sincerity. Have you ever heard that? People will say, it doesn't really matter what you believe so long as you're sincere. And so sincerity then becomes this top standard benchmark. That's the prerequisite. You know what it's like? Maybe if you ever had a final exam and it was a written exam and you got your scores back and it wasn't that good, so you went to your teacher, your professor, and you said, hey, look, I'm not happy with the way you scored my test here. I wrote every one of those answers with great sincerity, and your teacher may say back to you, yes, but you were sincerely wrong. And so, if you're sincerely wrong, then sincerity doesn't work. Come on, God, we were sincere. We accumulated a long list of good things that we did in your name. Didn't we climb this ladder of goodness to the very highest rung? In our day, we call that cultural, casual Christianity. Cultural Christians are not atheists. In fact, to the contrary. They believe in God. They can recite some of the better known biblical narratives. They'll tell you the story of Noah and the big flood, David and the giant, Moses navigating across the swollen river, stories about that Jesus told, Good Samaritan, prodigal son, things like that. Most of us have relationships with casual believers. Maybe we have a bunch. You might even live with one or two. I mean, I get that. I'm sure you work with some. Might be your best friend, your parents, your teachers, professors, your mentors, your coaches. They might proudly remind you that you share the same faith as theirs. How many times have people said to me, Bob, I share your faith, I'm just not into it as you are, like you are. Like you're too serious about this faith stuff. I'm okay, but I've got a fairly decent religious resume, but I'm not going over the top about it. Come on, man, you get paid to be religious. Some people say. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times, maybe 2,000. Bob, I just want to be happy, man. Isn't that God's plan really, Bob? I mean, isn't it God's favor just to make us happy? I don't know if it's too much to ask, but it's just probably not a good idea to hope that happiness is going to be your goal in life, because happiness, watch this, is 100% circumstantial. It's always conditioned on the circumstances of your life. Happiness is seriously overrated. For example, come on, when all the conditions of your life are going well, what's not to be happy about? But you let 2 or 3 of those things start to get out of whack or unravel, and you watch your happiness factor just start to slip and slide over into the weeds. You know what happiness is? Yes, it's an emotional reaction to the circumstances of your life, but it's temporary at best, because the circumstances never remain the same. I've lost count. How many times, goodness, have maybe Susan and I, we've been in attendance at a wedding reception, maybe after the service or something, and maybe it's the parent of the bride or the groom, and they'll stand up and they'll raise a toast and they'll say, we wish you all the, so you heard that speech too, all the happiness in the world. And I cringe every time, because they don't know what they're saying. Almost everybody's happy at a wedding, all except the father of the bride, because he's having to pay for the gig. But I mean, there's a huge difference between a wedding and a decades-long devotion to a marriage. Last Sunday afternoon, what a privilege this was. I officiated at a marriage renewal ceremony, 45 years. Last Sunday was the 45th anniversary for this couple. They were married August 15th, 1976. Now, how many of you believe that a 45-year marriage journey has just been smothered over by happiness and harmony? So some of you chuckle. I guess that's 16,500 days of just pure bliss. But I'll tell you what, their testimony, when they turned to greet their friends last week, their testimony didn't have anything to say about happiness. They said, we have been overwhelmed with periods and seasons of God's joy because we tried to devote ourselves to the virtues, values, and priorities of God. So many casual Christians and cultural Christians in our day, they want to make the top priority to be happy. So they build their whole life around the activities that they believe, these are the things that will allow me to be happy. This week I jotted down some things. And now watch this. Every single one of these will give you a temporary moment of happiness, like a baby smile. Look at this. Yeah, His daddy, by the way, is one of the assistant football coaches at Elon, and he was born about 3 or 4 months ago. Or this one. That's happy. That makes me happy. to look at that picture? How about fresh sheets when you crawl into those? Or a colorful sunset, the smell of freshly cut grass, especially if it's your neighbor's freshly cut grass. How about when somebody says to you, is this not a moment of happiness? Have you lost weight? Or the smell of frying bacon? Or watching two older adults walking out of the church after a service and they're holding hands? Your favorite song comes on the radio. You walk in the back door and the first face you see is your dog. For me, I like to put on a new pair of socks. How's that make you feel, Phil? When's the last time you bought a pair of socks, Phil? Don't answer that. Hey, I tell you know what'll make you happy for a moment? So you are celebrating your 30th birthday, you're out to dinner, and the server says, and cards you. It's your 30th birthday and you get carded. You're like, I love the way I'm not gaining too much ground on it. What about watch this now. Almost every single one of you. What about the happiness that just radiates from a delivery room? A brand new human is born. What's not to be happy about in a delivery room? I'll tell you. When our grandson was born, the doctors at Duke Medical Center had told us that there was a very little chance that he was going to survive. He lived 20 hours. We held him one time. Happiness in a delivery room? Hardly. Contentment? You bet, because our daughter and son-in-law had done everything they possibly could do, medically at least, during that pregnancy to give that little guy a chance. Heartbroken? Yes, but not happy. But not without hope. The Bible never says anything about happiness being the byproduct of following Jesus. In fact, sometimes it's just the opposite. So if you treat God like he's a genie in a bottle and you rub the side of the thing and God just pops out and grants you your wishes and personal dreams and takes care of the problems and the challenges, and then when God sees your sincerity, just piles on the good stuff. Kind of sometimes makes me feel like you remember Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty. Here's how he explained it. Watch.
Happy, 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 happy. Happy, happy, happy. Be happy, happy, happy. She's gonna be happy, happy. Happy, happy, happy. Happy, happy, happy.
Happy, happy, happy.
Happy, happy, happy.
We're happy, happy, happy.
Everybody happy, happy, happy.
Yeah, so pretty simple, isn't it? Just be happy. Look at what Paul says in Galatians 2. If keeping the law, okay, this is keeping the law. Ladder climbing. If keeping the law, he says, could make us right with God, then there was no need for Christ to die. What that means is if we can go to heaven based on our goodness, then somebody's going to have to stand up to Jesus and say, I hate to tell you this, but you died for nothing because you didn't have to pay. Authentic Christianity simply means that we understand that there's a price tag attached to our sin and disobedience, our disorder, and all the rest. And no matter how long we live, no matter how many spiritual ladders we climb, no matter how many pages thick is our spiritual resume, ladder climbing casual Christianity, even though this is an epidemic in our age, everybody, it's an epidemic. More people than you can ever imagine believe this. The odds of this working are pretty much close to zero because it's 100% perfection, and nobody is able to do that. So casual Christians, cultural Christians, they're very quick to say, well, come on, I believe in God. I just don't believe everything in the Bible that the Bible says about God. Let me illustrate how that might work. You think about in a few months from now, millions of Americans, right after the day after, Black Friday, or day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and everybody's gonna go to the attic or to the garage, and they're gonna scrounge around, they're gonna find the family manger scene, and they're gonna set it up on the coffee table in the living room, or maybe put it in the centerpiece of the dining room table. But if you ask many of those people, do you know the story behind that? Can you tell the story here about God? Do you really believe that was God in human flesh? Many of those people will say, well, no, I wouldn't go that far. If you ask how many demonstrate their faith and trust in the God who literally wrote himself into our story so that we could see what God is like up close, his character, his plans, his priorities, and his purposes. Many of them would look at you and say, well, I'm not sure I've ever thought about it all that much, now that you put it that way. If you invited them to talk about their personal devotion to figuring out, so what does it mean to be a fully devoted follower of Christ? Sometimes they're gonna say, well, I'm in, but I'm not like you, not like all in or anything. I dare you sometime to tell your casual Christian friends that God did not write himself into the human story a couple of thousand years ago in that manger so that we could have fun at a company Christmas party or staff dinners, or we could go to Target or Amazon and bust the family budget wide open just to get the right gifts. That's not the reason that God came into this world at all. And you know what your cultural Christian friends will tell you? Well, who died and made you the Grinch? Another barrier to following Jesus, it's afflicting tens of thousands of people, is that they're convinced, they're absolutely 100% determined to tell you that the reason Jesus showed up on this planet was to make us good people, better people, nice people. Great moms and dads and friends and neighbors and teammates, bosses and employees. You know, good people give blood, hold the door open for a stranger, let somebody merge in front of you in traffic. That's what good people do. And surely they will tell you, come on, Bob, isn't it true that these are the kind of people who go to heaven? And then if you say, well, no, not really. No, Jesus came to die so that guilty people could be made innocent. Jesus came to this planet so that he could pay for our sin debt so that we don't have to. He came to close the gap between sin, which is separating us from God, and the love of God. And casual Christians will say to you, why do you have to be so serious all the time? Lighten up. Good, better, best. Let me tell you about Jerry. Jerry showed up here at SMC almost exactly 24 years ago. He came here for the first time in early September 1997. Jerry had just retired from a pretty strong career. He and his wife had decided to retire here, brought a retirement home between here and Greensboro. He was going to play a lot of golf, and that's exactly what he did. His wife, well, she thought, well, I'd like to make some new friends. They'd not lived here. They'd lived in a distant state, and so she thought that maybe church was a good place to go to, meet friends. Jerry had a bad taste in his mouth about church, and especially church people. Jerry had walked away from church decades before. He had a bunch of baggage, had a bunch of church baggage, and he could just still see the faces of people in church that he just didn't. Well, some neighbors invited them to come to SMC, and they tried it. His wife was impressed. Jerry, nope, not at all. In fact, to call him an angry skeptic, that might not even be close to accurate. The first Sunday I met them in the original sanctuary, this building wasn't here, but over in the original sanctuary, the first Sunday they were here, his wife was so warm and gracious. You cannot imagine how embarrassed she was when Jerry started thumping me like this on the chest. I'd never met the guy before. He's thumping me on the chest, and he said, hey, I'm here today against my better wishes. I just want you to know. And I said, hey, you know what, Jerry? There are probably a bunch of people here today just like you, no problem. And he was shocked because I think he thought, I'm going to duke it out with this preacher because I'm going to say some things that are going to rattle him, and he's never going to like me, and I think he was disappointed in my reaction. Well, this defiant resistance went on for several weeks, maybe, I don't know, about a month and a half, and same sarcasm. But it seemed like each week there was a little bit less intensity, and after a couple of weeks, the chest thumping stopped. In mid-October, Jerry stood in front of me one Sunday and he said, "You have almost persuaded me, but I got a lot more questions." And I was thinking, I haven't persuaded anything, but the Spirit of God is, I'm thinking, the Spirit of God is working on you. And he said, "Can we meet?" So we started meeting. We met almost every single week for about, 6 weeks. He was struggling. The main thing is, he said, I can't get my head around it, Bob, that one man died on a cross 2,000 years ago to pay for what he called, I've got a life full of moral screw-ups. And then came Jerry's defining moment. It was Sunday, November the 9th, 1997. It was the very first time our ladder showed up on our platform. The sermon that Sunday was entitled, "Show Me the Way." Actually, I want to read from the manuscript from that sermon almost 25 years ago. This is exactly the words that Jerry heard in that sanctuary next door and everybody else that Sunday. Here's what I said. "A long time ago, God saw that the people he loved were coming up way short of the standard, and he realized that they were accumulating sins and moral failures at an alarming rate. So what was God going to do? He could have lowered the standards, brought the benchmark down, but that was not an option. And he couldn't just turn his head away from this stack of sins and moral failures. These had to be paid for. Justice demands it. So one day God did an extraordinary thing. Because of his outrageous and totally irrational love for people like us, God sent his son to live among us and to eventually die in our place to pay for our sins and our truckload of failures. So one Friday morning, almost 2,000 years ago, Jesus picked up a cross. They pounded 7-inch spikes through his wrist and feet. God placed my stack of moral failures squarely on his shoulders. His death was my sin payment. God provided an option, a blueprint, a pathway, a way out. And just before he died on that cross, the last thing Jesus said was, "It is finished, accomplished. Papa, I completed what you sent me to do. The sin debt is paid in full." And then I said this. The Bible is the story of God's intervention when he decided to write himself into our story, but there must be a personal transaction between me and God. What Jesus accomplished on the cross has to be appropriated and applied to my life. It's not enough to know about Christianity. You can study Jesus and accumulate information until you're an expert. But we all have to take a step of faith and receive the forgiveness that was purchased on the cross, trust Jesus with our eternal destiny. We all have to sign up personally, trust what Jesus did on the cross. We have to say yes. And then I said to the whole church, so what do you trust in? Is it enough for eternity? And then I read this verse, Romans 10:13. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Everybody, when they came into the church that weekend, they received a sermon, a little sermon note, kind of like you got when you came in here today. Here's the card. November 1997, God's standard of goodness. And then I said, there's a place on there for you to write your name. If you write your name there and you trust not in the ladder or the stacks or the resume, then your sins can be forgiven. The distance on this ladder can be between you and God. This distance can be erased. And you can start a personal relationship with Jesus. He will become your God. Heaven will be your final destination, not based on your goodness, but because God is good. You might not be ready to sign this today. That's okay. Take this home with you, because you never know. The next day was Monday, November the 10th, 1997. Jerry stopped by my office, And this was what he handed me. And I don't know if you can read that, but he signed it 11/10/97. Okay, Bob, show me the way. You know I have many questions. We kept talking about his questions. Several more weeks. About 3 days before Christmas, he stopped by to see me and he said, hey, guess what? He said, a few days ago, I accepted Christ as my Savior. And he said, I'm going to tell my wife at the Christmas Eve service. Which he did. Best Christmas gift she ever received. If you've never signed something like this, you don't have to wait about that. You don't have to bank on, you don't have to worry about your moral inventory, your goodness resume. It's not going to stack up anyway. Take one look at the cross over my head or the cross on that piece of paper that you were given. There's only one passing grade. Perfection. And if you can't handle that one, then you're in trouble unless 1,000 years before Jesus was born, the great Solomon tried to help us understand. Look at what he said. Not a single person on earth is always good and never sins. So if you decide to put your name on the piece of paper like Jerry did, you know how when a professional golfer, they finish a round of golf and they have to go into the tent and they have to sign they sign the scorecard to verify their score, and then they have to get their playing competitor to also sign to verify. If today is your day to sign under the cross, get somebody that you came with to sign to verify it for you. I'll be in the lobby when this service is over. I'll sign it. I signed about 6 or 7 after the first service. I'll sign it. I'd like to sign it. You know, there's 18 inches from your head to your heart. Jerry almost allowed that 1.5 feet to mess him up. Almost. Smart guy. Until he decided to give his sin debt over to Jesus. And now the rest of the story. Jerry's wife called me on Wednesday, January 14th, 1998. Exactly 21 days after Christmas Eve. And she said, Bob, Jerry is in the hospital at Moses Cone. He's had a stroke and it's bad. I said, I'll be over there in a few minutes. About 30 minutes later, I walked into Jerry's room. He was in the intensive care unit. He could not speak. His left side was paralyzed, but he asked his wife to hand him a notepad, and he scribbled these words, I trust Jesus. God have mercy on me. And then he scratched out the word baptized. And I said, Jerry, you want to be baptized? And he said, yeah. So I found one of those little plastic things, and I put some water in it, and I put some water on his forehead, and I prayed over him, and he was baptized. And I said, Jerry, just remember, man, you know, good people with a world record resume, they don't wind up in heaven, but rescued, redeemed people do. And I said, soon you may see Jesus, like in the prodigal. Run to him. If you see him, run to him. He died 2 days later. We had his memorial service in that room over there, in the same space where he used to thump my chest. I got questions. I got a bunch of questions. In the same room where on December the 24th, 97, he decided to take Jesus at his word, trust in God's plan, and never step on the ladder again. I wish that for you. I love you, St. Mark's.